My name's Matt Harriman, and this is the Achieve and Enjoy podcast, where we explore the relationship between work and happiness, achievement and joy, and success and contentment. We do that by sharing our own stories and interviewing some really interesting people, some of which you've never heard of, but that have something interesting to teach us about how to achieve our definition of success and enjoy the path we take to get there. Today, I'm with Yogashri Pradhan, and we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. She's got a really awesome YouTube channel that she dives into, all kinds of things, oil and gas, some other topics beyond just technical stuff too, which I really appreciate. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start by just letting you kind of tell your story. So how did you get to where you are now? Where'd you come from? You can go as far back, if you want to go to birth, you can, but um I think focusing especially on, the professional life and college, how did you get here? Like all that kind of stuff.
It all started when I was born. I'm kidding. When you asked that question, I thought about how I got into STEM. That's the route that I'm going to get into. My parents knew that I was inclined for math and science, and they just encouraged that by getting more toys that were relating to math and science. Then that transpired to competing in math and science competitions, also transpired to going to a STEM camp that was geared towards increasing awareness of that you can have engineering as a career, and that was through the University of Houston's grade camp. So I'm a product of women in STEM initiatives. Really am, and I'm very proud to say that. And
Was your mother in a technical field or your father or anything? Was there any influence there?
there was some influence. My father was in a technical field, but I'm the first in my family in oil and gas.
Okay.
Once I knew that I was surrounded by a lot of encouragement to pursue my passion in math and science. Funny enough, I knew since I was a junior in college, or not college, junior in high school, that I wanted to pursue petroleum engineering. The fact that being in Houston has some influence to it, but also the STEM camp that I was in had a session of engineers that were already in the workplace interacting with high schoolers such as myself. Those that made an impression on me were those that are in the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
I carried that with me and saying that this is where I wanted to be in the future. College, I've maintained my involvement through Society of Petroleum Engineers, through volunteerism, and just joining initiatives that I knew that could challenge myself. There was a student paper contest that SPE holds. There's Petra Bowl, if you hear it from among the students that people compete in. So I did it all. Then I come into the industry and not everything is as rosy as everyone says it's going to be because I came in at 2001 when oil was pretty high.
Mhm.
I left in 2015 when oil was taking a nosedive.
Yeah.
My first job was working for Devon as a production engineer, and within my first year, I was laid off because of the commodity environment, and I was also a rotational engineer at the time. Then my next job, and the funny thing is I knew the power of networking, I knew the power of just being involved in Society of Petroleum Engineers. So when I saw the writing on the wall of things that were going south, I reached out to about 150 people. I remembered the specific number was about 150 emails that I sent to people asking for pieces of advice.
Mhm.
And funny enough, I reach out to my university and I get a business card. I get this business card that from a SP president of 2014 that was starting this initiative in university lands called Texas Oil and Gas Institute. I
Okay.
walked into that interview thinking that this was an internship opportunity because the business card came from a lunch and learn for students looking for internships.
Mhm.
But when I left the interview, I told Jeff Spat that I'm looking forward to this opportunity or thank you for this opportunity to interview. Is this a internship position? And then he looks at me very strange and says, "You just interviewed for a full-time position." Let's just say that I landed it, and the good part of this story is that I landed in a week after being laid off, and
That's
that's
awesome.
that's nearly unheard of. I was very fortunate. And coming from a government and consulting perspective, working in university lands gave me an opportunity to look at different operators and how they were able to produce their wells within the assets of university lands. And it's about 2.1 million acres leased out
Yeah.
to about 280 operators. So we can talk more about that if we need to.
If it's okay, I have a couple of questions about what you talked about that I don't wanna lose. So, you mentioned one of the things is that you were introduced to some engineers when you were in high school that were oil and gas, and you kinda saw them as, they were the most interesting ones that you saw. What was it? Was it seeing them as, the role models is a strong word, but was it that, or was there something else about the oil and gas industry that drew you to it?
There were 2 things. One was the people, the fact that they were outgoing and they just seemed happy. I know that's the theme of this podcast about it of achievement and joy, but I saw that joy. That was one, and I knew that I wanted to, "Hey, I wanna be happy." And the second one was just knowing that oil and gas is a dynamic industry, and the fact that the majority of our energy consumption comes from oil and gas or I mean, our dependency comes from oil and natural gas. It's hard to say that we could easily replace that. And I really appreciate the fact that I can work for an industry where you improve the quality of I mean, I'm not trying to blow smoke, but like, yeah, you improve the quality of lives of people. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that it was a dynamic industry. It seemed like there were a lot of problems to solve and
Yeah,
being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, that was something that
yeah.
was in.
I mean, for me, the opposite of happiness to me is boredom, and I think this is not an industry that you're gonna get bored in, ever. Like, good and bad stuff for sure, but there's not a good, not very often you're gonna be bored. So one other question that I have, I thought it was interesting that you said so you emailed, 150 plus people, but you said that you asked for advice. So I think that's a really interesting nugget that, a lot of people, if they need work, they're gonna spam everybody and ask for work, but you asked for advice. Can you talk about that?
It was a piece of advice that I actually ended up getting from a professor that I had at University of Texas. She recently retired from the role. Her name is, Professor Deborah Hempel Medina. She was the one that said that you ought to couch any opportunities that you're looking for as asking for advice. Because
Mhm.
networking is a two-way street at the end of the day. And that's something that I learned too, because being at the receiving end of someone asking something out of me seems very impersonal. And at the same time, it seems very transactional.
Mhm.
And that reduces my probability of trying to help you out. But if someone approaches me asking how they can help me, that's gonna have me stop and think about what exactly do I have that this person can contribute or this person can offer. And as far as advice goes, that puts a person in a position where you can provide your story and people like talking about themselves. So it's pretty advantageous. But I think the fact that I was early career and I was reaching out to people that were more experienced made them want to help me, made them want to be in that mentor position.
Yeah. And I play that off of so I had a mentor, John Howell. So he was the founder of Portfolio Decisions, portfolio and strategy wizard, relatively famous and all this stuff. And he went on to teach entrepreneurship after he left that company. And I was talking to him when I started this business, and I was like, I've got the idea, but what do I do? And I was just talking to him and trying to get some advice. And what he said was, you find 10 people whose opinion matter. If they're potential clients, awesome. If not, that's okay. But call them and ask for advice and say, here's the problem that I see needing solved. Here's the solution that I have for it. And here's why I think I'm the person to solve it, and see what they say, like get their feedback. And it was really, really valuable. And I think that's a nuance that I think some people miss, because when you're asking for advice, like, if I get asked for advice, that feels good. That means that you respect, me, my opinion. Like you said, I might get to talk about myself, which also strokes the ego and all of that stuff. But I think about cold DMs on LinkedIn. Like, I'll get the ones where people are, "Hey, do you have website work that you need done or something?" I'm like, "No." But the people that have asked for, "Hey, I'm looking for ways to grow my business. I see you're doing well. How can I do that? Like, could you share some feedback?" I'll go, I'll spend hours and hours with those people. That's really cool.
Thank you. Right. And again, I've been on that receiving end of people messaging me on LinkedIn. Here's my resume. Find a job for me, please.
Yeah.
If they say please.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully they do. But okay, so I'd interrupted you. You were talking about your time at University Lands, and you can pick back up.
It was 2 years later working for University Lands. I was in an interesting position because I was in a position where I arranged a whole mentorship program for graduate students for UT and A&M students, and part of that University Lands program is getting interns to do a lot of the technical analysis, and then we do a lot of the advising. And I'm very proud to say that I was able to create that mentorship program, but I also learned at the time that I couldn't be the one over volunteering or overextending myself at that time either because I'm I'm also early career. I need to learn technical things as well. And that was around the time where I had to learn about boundaries, I had to learn about saying no, and then I also had to learn about prioritizing technical things. And that was a inflection point for me to wanna pursue a master's in petroleum engineering. So I actually ended up doing that in 2017. I started my master's in petroleum engineering while working full time. Then 2018 came along, and I also thought, well, oil is coming back up. I wanna work for an operator. At the same time, because the oil and gas industry is very dynamic, I got laid off again. Because, uh because Texas Oil and Gas Institute was a startup kind of organization within a government entity, and if you hear a lot about how startups end up, there was a reduction in funding, also meant that was an elimination of that organization. So, it was a combination of the time where I thought it was a luxury to want to look became a need to look. But I was very fortunate to be picked up by Endeavor, working as a reservoir engineer and getting that operator experience in the Midland Basin as an asset engineer, and that was very fun. But knowing that I had 7 years of Midland Basin experience, albeit in different companies, I thought maybe it's time for a change, and that's how I started working for Coterra. This Tuesday will be my 1-year anniversary working for the company, but I was
Congrats.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It's not everyone can talk about their anniversaries, especially with a dynamic industry like the oil and gas industry, and I had to learn that very early on in my career.
Yeah, and especially in this industry, the anniversaries should be celebrated. For sure. And so you mentioned setting boundaries and not overextending yourself, and that's something that for me, it wasn't until I had kids that I realized, that, hey, I should probably set a boundary or 2. Like, I was always good at prioritizing and stuff like that, but I pushed pretty hard for a really long time, and it sounds like you kind of were a little bit more aware of that risk of overextending yourself. Did you have, like, a bad burnout or anything that taught you that the hard way, or were you just smart about it?
No, I was a burnout.
Okay.
It took a burnout for me to do that.
Yeah.
It took a feeling of a lack of fulfillment that I was doing a lot of administrative things. I was volunteering for a lot of administrative things because I had a desire to perform. I had a desire to give back. I had a desire to pay it forward because those were things that were always told. And when you think about it, workaholism is socially condoned when you think about it. People take a lot of pride in how busy they are. People take a lot of pride. And I thought, hey, the more I extend myself, the more I put myself out there, the more opportunities that I'm going to get. I tend to push myself really hard and because I'm a person of many interests. There's a book that I'm reading right now. It's called Great at Work by Morton Hansen. And it really talks about why high performers are high performers. And one of the first things that they talk about is doing less, but obsessing over those things that you
Mhm.
do about. And there was a study that was done where people who do less and then they coast are the worst performers. People who do more, but they don't perform well in what they do are the second worst performers. people who do more and they stress the most are the third worst. But the thing is, they're not the best. The ones who
Yeah.
do the best are the ones who end up doing less.
Yeah.
So that's something that I really needed to be reminded of, and it was people who told me saying like, "Hey, you seem to be the type of person who likes to please other people," or, "Hey, you tend to say yes to a lot of things. Try saying no." I was constantly reminded to say no throughout my career just because I learned that lesson before. The opportunities that come up sneak up on you and you wanna say yes to everything because fear of missing out is
Yeah.
real.
No, it definitely is, and I think a lot of people being busy can help you feel important too. It's like,
Mhm.
I'm in demand, I'm busy, like, it's a badge of honor for a lot of folks, and, yeah, saying no, I remember, like, when I got my first manager job, so frontline manager, you have no control over anything, right? And I remember I had to set a no goal. So, like, every day, I was like, "I have to say no to at least 5 things." And most of those were coming from, my bosses asking for stuff from my team. I hit that goal usually, and it still wasn't enough. The amount of demands on your time, especially inside an organization, are pretty wild. How have you taken like, what are your, let's say, principles or approaches to healthy boundaries now? You do a lot. So we haven't talked about the YouTube channel yet, but that's awesome. You do Petro Papers, which is also, cool. And it seems like you have a lot of output. And you're in school and you're working full time. Like, you're doing a lot. So how are you setting and thinking about boundaries and overextension and stuff now?
Well, that's a great question you asked because the YouTube channel and the podcast, the Petro Papers podcast, they were all stuff I wanted to do for fun.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, but I had to take a really hard look of how much I was doing. And again, it took a burnout for me to realize that how much I was doing. And I realized there are certain things that I want to do well for right now. And a lot of it is, hey, I started a new job. I want to do well at this job. I mean, not saying that I'm not gonna focus less at my job. I'm just gonna be more efficient at it, later on. I am in school, I got a year left, I wanna focus on school. But how do I set those boundaries is looking at everything that I'm doing and treating that as a whole piece of pie and how much piece of the pie goes to what.
Hmm.
Some that will go to work, some that will go to school. I very much value fitness, so some that will go to fitness. And then obviously there's discretionary time for myself and family time with my husband and my cats. So there was a pie that I had to make up, and that was where that article that I wrote was respecting my bandwidth was something that I wanted to publish, that scaling back on some things. Like, just because I do a lot and I've created a lot of output in the past doesn't mean that I always need to do that at the same
Yeah.
capacity. There are times that it's okay to take a break, and there's seasons for everything.
What you just said, I think a lot of people need to hear that. Like, it's okay to take a break. And I don't think people hear that kind of stuff enough. But yeah, that article that you wrote on bandwidth and the video that you did about overextending yourself, that stuff hit home for me. Likewise, I'm really hard on myself. And, especially I really want to help as many people as I can. I didn't always used to be that way, but the last 10 years or so, I've started to care about people for some weird reason. But yeah, it's tough because you feel like when you're saying no to helping people, it does feel bad. But I think what you said earlier about, the highest performers, they do less, but they do it really well. I think of the people that I've been around, the people that I really look up to, the role models that I have, that's definitely true. They are relatively calm, but they're very effective. And so I don't think too much about efficiency, but I think about like effectiveness. Like, what are you able to accomplish? What have you seen from role models or mentors, things like that? Like, what approaches have you seen they take to prioritizing? Because one of the biggest pieces of being effective is doing the most important things. And with that comes prioritization. Like, how do you approach prioritization? Because you have the different pieces of the pie, but what order do they go in, and what are the minimums that you'll accept for different ones, stuff like that?
That's a very good question. And I go back to this is going to sound pretty philosophical, but it goes back to values. You go back to what your values are, and is what you're doing right now, is what you're doing for the period that you're investing the most time in. Does that align with your values? Because priorities can change, but values stay the same. And you've probably heard that before. I hope that wasn't the other way around.
No,
But
no, you got it.
I heard priorities change, but values stay the same. So from what I've seen in role models that do really well, it's interesting because your role models can also change over time too. Because coming out of school, my role models were the CEOs of operators. And I was like, I want to be the CEO. But now, when I knew what my inclinations are, as far as I love the technical side, being a really good technical professional or like going through a technical route to be successful in your career. I mean, there's too many people like that, but at the same time, that's also a good career as well. So now I have like certain SMEs that are role models for me. And what I've seen as far as the prioritization goes, I learned this from Jeff Spath, the mentor that I had from or the boss that I had at Texas Oil and Gas Institute. You have a T-shaped growth where you specialize in certain things, but you can be a generalist in other things. For those technical chiefs, for example, they choose a few things that they're really good at, that they're really passionate about. And then they do really well at being researched and providing the advice or the expertise on that. At the same time, I see them taking care of themselves the most too. Like
Mhm.
they take vacation and they disconnect from vacation too.
I like that you said, they all do pick a few things because I think especially on the internet and Twitter and stuff, you hear pick one single niche, one thing to do, focus all in on that. And I think that there is a time and a place, especially if you're like VC backed or something, you kind of have to do that. But I think the people that I've got a ton of respect for are the ones that have a couple, two, three, four things that they really care about. They really do those well. And they're balanced because of it. Because I think if you're only in one area, you get blinders on, you only think about that one thing. And there's so many principles to all kinds of stuff that just apply across different areas that you're going to lose a lot of creativity if you're not doing different stuff. Mm.
Absolutely. I will say there is a time, you're right. There is a time to pick a niche on something. And there was also a study that was done that was expressed in the book of multitasking versus doing things in sequential order.
Mhm.
Those that do the tasks in sequential order end up getting their tasks done faster than those who multitask.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot about multitasking that is not awesome because it's task switching too fast, right?
Yes.
Is what multitasking like really is. I want to talk about the your YouTube channel now. So like why did you start it? What was that like? Because I know especially oil and gas, people, some companies get pretty unsupportive of their individuals even posting stuff on LinkedIn and all kinds of stuff like that. So I want to hear how that's gone.
I didn't even think about how my company would react or how the company that or would react based on what I would post. Because when I post, I think I'm being mindful. I'm not trying to bash any company or anything like that. I'm genuinely being curious about what people's thoughts are about the industry. I'm just a curious person, so I have a lot of thoughts. I've actually wanted to do the YouTube channel for a very long time. I know I'm good on a camera, or when I say good on a camera, I've done a lot of public speaking.
Yeah.
Obviously, I can get rusty, but I'm good at public speaking. I'm comfortable on a camera. And the inflection point for me wanting to start the YouTube channel was a mixture of reaching a burnout, but also getting some feedback that I did not appreciate. And that came from me applying for a position, a volunteering position within, I mean, I'll admit it, within SPE actually. And it was for a board direct, it was like a board position. And you get feedback when you don't get selected, or you get
Mhm.
feedback in general. So I was getting this feedback, and some of the feedback that I've received in the past, okay, say no. You're doing a lot of things, say no. Okay, I've heard that before. But the one that really stuck out to me was how much self-promotion that I was doing, and someone literally saying I was the queen of self-promotion. And it was a laughable I laughed at that when I first heard it, but it really affected me.
That would piss me off.
It really affected me
That's tough.
that there was somebody in this organization that said that.
How did you take that? What did you do with that?
Oh, I played on it. I ramped it up instead of scaling back, I ramped it up. That's how I started the YouTube channel. Like, "Oh, you want to know promotion? I can do a lot of promotion. I'm really good at branding.
I love it.
Watch me."
Yeah.
So, I posted my wedding video, which was on a well site with my husband.
Yeah.
Like, "Let me post this as" okay, that's promotion. And then I started posting things that I was really passionate about, which was in oil and gas, and everything has been published information. So I started posting multiple videos a week because I was really passionate about it, and
Mhm.
I had the bandwidth at the time.
Yeah.
I also knew that I was gonna have to walk a fine line because anything that you post on social media, your employer will also see, your employer will also react, and they will also have questions about it. Because if you post something that's really negative and you are associated with the company, they can cut you off really quickly. Well, I was well aware of that, but I felt like I was doing everything right that I could because my intentions were pretty benign.
Fueled by a little bit of spite, which is always a good thing, I
Fueled
think.
by a little bit of spite, a little bit of spite.
The stuff that you post is very clearly, like, well-intentioned to help and to educate, and especially, like, early stage career folks and people trying to get into the industry or get jobs and deal with some of those problems, and has that become, kind of the purpose of the channel is to help people?
The purpose of the channel is to help people. I wish when I was a student in undergrad, instead of having those specific networking moments where it's kind of a rat race to even get to talk to a company representative, I wanted somebody accessible. Might be a way to be accessible to those who may not have had the chance to talk to a lot of company reps. And I've had an international audience that don't get that kind of exposure that gets the exposure from the YouTube channel.
Yeah, and I think that's a deeper problem in the industry. The industry has all kinds of perception problems, but I think we don't do a great job of sharing our stories and sharing information with each other. Like, there's a lot of just competitive secretness, and some of it's warranted, a lot of it's not, though. And that bleeds over into the service side of the business and software and all of that stuff. There's just idea that I know how to do things better. I'm protecting my wonderful, beautiful ideas that nobody else could ever have, but actually everybody in the industry has been doing that for 50 years. So it's not actually special. What are your plans for the channel? Is it more of a hobby fun thing, or do you have like a real strategy that you're trying to execute with it?
I would be lying to say that I'm treating it like a small business. But at the same time, there's gonna be a moment where because I'm focusing on other things, because there are things that I would rather invest my time in the most, it's gonna be a hobby for right now.
Yeah.
And whenever I do have the free time, then I will invest the energy into obsessing over the YouTube channel. But now and then I post a video whenever
Yeah.
I have an idea that I think is worth that is worth sharing.
Cool. I think you were introduced to me as a YouTuber, which is awesome. You just don't hear that in our industry. And I love seeing people that are being more open, sharing more information. All of that stuff is really good. How about Petro Papers? Do you want to talk about it? What it is, why you do it?
Sure. Petro papers, I'm someone that loves reading technical papers, but I know that the barrier for reading technical papers is either the access to it or the fact that some of these papers are so dense and they have no context of how can you walk me through a technical paper to understand the objective and understand everything? How can I make that digestible? And I started like listing all these questions and I realized kind of similar to a book club, for example, where you interview the author. Why don't you interview the author of these papers and ask straight from the source what their intentions are or what clarifications you have of the paper? Not meant to tear the paper apart, rather get that clarity, get that transparency on how how the paper came to be or what the paper was meant to convey. And it could serve a niche audience, to be honest with you, for those that are interested in reading technical papers. But it really came off as something that I was really passionate about, and I like having a repository of questions that I've asked in the past with those papers.
I think that's another, piece of evidence for the need to make things more accessible too, because like with those papers, like it's tough to read a lot of those papers. And I'd much rather hear, the person that wrote it or somebody that has the willpower and brain power to actually read it and to explain it. And yeah, there's a lot to that. What have you learned from doing that? I'm sure you've met some interesting people. Like what have you gotten out of it so far?
What I've gotten out of it so far is when I read a paper, it's so complex. It's not always clear, but some of the best papers that I've read are the ones that are the simplest to understand, that are the easiest to follow through. And people don't mean to make things complicated, but when they put their ideas on paper, sometimes it can get pretty convoluted.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially with technical papers, I feel like there's almost a brain mode that gets switched on where it's like, okay, I need 10 references and I need to show the formula for everything and all that stuff. And you forget to explain the point, actually.
Exactly. I've learned a lot about people, and I've learned a lot about how people also want to share that information, and they get really excited to hear that there's somebody that read the paper first, which is I'll take the heat for it, and then
Yeah.
willing to ask those detailed questions.
Yeah. That's really cool. Well, in addition to all of the technical content that you've done to help people, you bring up things that are non-technical and that are harder, maybe touchier subjects for some to talk about, like stress and time management and looking for a job and some of the stuff we talked about earlier with productivity and boundaries and effectiveness and things like that. Why is it important to you? Like, why do those things matter to you?
I noticed they got the most views.
Okay.
I'll be honest, they got the most views. That
Yeah.
was the first thing that I thought about, but I also realized that I asked myself the question, if I was a student at university again, and if I wanted to reach out to somebody that is in the industry that only talked about I wanted to add a human element to my channel.
Mhm.
And the human elements that I've noticed working in the industry, I know I'm not the only one who thinks these things. I know that there are people out there that deal with stress. I know there are people out there that deal with or looking for a job. And I thought, well, this is still informational. This is still instructive. I can still create content to help other people in those areas that can resonate with them a little bit more. And I noticed that career development is what a lot of people like to hear, like, what's in it
Mhm.
for them, in
Yeah.
other words.
And I think that like those sorts of topics, the more personal one, especially in technical industries and stuff, it's just not talked about. Like, I don't feel like anything in college prepares you for, the difficulties, the stress and the interpersonal stuff that'll come up and all those things. And then, when you get into working for companies, like nobody talks about that stuff. Like you and your peer might complain about it to each other in the break room or something, but like it's not a open topic. And I've seen some people in the industry coming around and managers and leaders be a little bit more emotionally intelligent and think about, the stress load on their team and how much change are they going through, how much like all of that kind of stuff. Have you seen that shift like over the course of your career? Have you seen progress there?
I have. I have quite a bit. I've seen there's a lot more people wanting, and I think a lot of it has to do as a result of the downturn of low commodity prices, that there's people that are out there that want to help. They may not be able to help at full capacity, but they want to help. So those topics surface up. And then you always hear about work-life balance, which I call work-life integration. But there's always those questions. But I hear people wanting to increase productivity, and one of the ways to increase productivity is those human elements. So that
Yeah. So I'm writing an article right now for JPT about like how a healthy work environment drives a healthy P&L. And I think that so many people see them as like in conflict with each other. Like they hear about caring about your workers' stress or like all of this stuff, and they're like, oh, that's soft woo woo stuff that doesn't impact the business. But like if you think about how your day goes and how you approach your work, if you don't care about it versus if you do, like that's what employee engagement is, right? And it's become a buzzword and people just gloss over, kind of like when people say culture. But employee engagement is how much your employees care about their work and the company and stuff like that. And especially right now when companies are afraid to hire because they're afraid of a recession, don't want to set themselves up for layoffs, all of that stuff. I get it. The way to get more out of your people, I mean, one is training, obviously, make them more effective and get more out of the same people you have. But the other one is actually taking care of them, like as human beings. Have you seen any good examples of companies prioritizing that and leaders prioritizing that?
I can speak from people that work within my company. I have managers that are emotionally intelligent and that they check in on you. They do welfare checks in a way to make sure that you're fine, that you have all the resources that you need to do your job. I'm fortunate to be surrounded by those managers, and I'm not blowing smoke up the current company that
Yeah.
I'm really not. My direct manager has a pretty good EQ, in my opinion, and it really shows because he does check up on you, and then the feedback that I've also gotten from him is not just related to like specific things about the job, but how to approach the job based on my personal well-being.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a surprise for me. It wasn't like a blanket, you need to work on soft skills. There was
Yeah.
something specific. And there's definitely an art to feedback. That's an example that I do want to mention, that there's welfare checks, that the feedback that I've gotten, and that there is an awareness that there's a difference between doing something because you have to versus doing something because you want to. There's a tie to productivity there.
I'll put that same example on those welfare checks. So I remember I had a boss every, call it 2 weeks, he would stop by and check in, but it was very obvious that he was doing it just to check a box. So he would like come to my office, and I remember one time he like looked at, I think I had like a Red Bull sitting on the desk, and he like looked at it and he said something about the ingredients and then like walked out. I was like, "This is weird." And then the boss that I had immediately after that, he would come in and sit down and like, you could just tell that he cared. And he was like, "How are you?" And if I had just like blew it off and gave a one word answer, he wouldn't accept that. He was like, "No, what's up?" And you could tell the managers that care. And that's another version of employee engagement, right? It's how much do they care about what they're doing? There's this perception that it's either or, right? And I think that the business and the people, it's an and for sure. Like the most impressive, effective leaders that I've ever been around, they're very practical on the business side. Like they're focused, they know what has to happen, they're pragmatic, all of that stuff. But they also care about the people because they know that they have to go together.
I agree. This is a relationship business.
I think everyone is.
Yeah.
Every business is, I think. And I think it's easy to forget, especially as you get higher up in organizations, that these are humans that you're like dealing with. I hate the term like reduction in force. No, you're firing people, and like the dehumanization of layoffs and I mean, lost time incidents. That's another good example of, dehumanizing things to make it not feel as bad or scary or whatever.
It's really interesting to think about.
What do you want to see change in the industry? So you've been in it for a while, you care about it, and you're thoughtful about the industry, its perception, like externally, like what needs to happen internally to it. Like what do you want to see change in oil and gas in the next 10 years?
Wow. That's a very good question. I would actually like to see more crucial conversations between people. I understand the purpose of an SB conference. Like there were knowledge sharing sessions for sure, but I would like to see more open crucial conversations, whether if it's within an organization. My conflict resolution style is avoid. I don't like conflict,
Okay.
but I've had to learn how to confront people if there is an issue. And I had to learn how to use more direct words because as someone who likes to avoid conflict, you will sugarcoat or you will skirt around the subject. When I say more crucial conversations,
Yeah.
more crucial conversations in terms of EQ, I understand that skill set is extremely important and competencies are extremely important, but I think we need to have a conversation on how to work with people. I treat everyone like an engineering problem, in other words. That's
Mhm.
how I've had to improve my emotion. A lot of it was learned.
Mhm.
I wasn't naturally born with an EQ. I mean, I was told by a current CEO that I had no EQ. That was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah, more crucial conversations
Yeah.
and more transparency.
I
Really,
love that.
yeah.
There's such a protective kind of coding around so many people and so many meetings, and you're not really saying what's on your mind, and it's kind of watered down, and that is, especially with bigger companies, that's pretty normal, but it's not good. I love that saying need more crucial conversations. One of the other episodes that we did with Jim Dubois, he talked about he's got a very conflict avoidant personality. But what he learned over the years was that meant that he needs to run toward conflict faster. Because if you don't, then the eventual conflict is bigger. The more waiting you do, the more anxiety you have, and then the end result is actually a bigger conflict than if you just go at it. And I thought that was a pretty cool lesson that, everybody kind of probably knows, but you don't really know it. What else? Anything else you want to talk about?
I hope this wasn't your last question, so you could say yes or no, but how my employer views this stuff?
No, yeah, let's hear it.
Sure. It's funny because I was never confronted by it until I was confronted by it, and before I changed jobs, I was asked pretty bluntly about the purpose of my channel, what if it grows really big, really questioning my focus on what I really wanted and how much I was gonna invest the time to generate output. I had to say that this was a small business and this was a hobby because it was at the end of the day. I wasn't making videos during the workplace. This is what I do outside of my time.
Yeah.
And again, I have my own personal filter as far as it's common sense not to share your company information in a video. Like you don't do that. You also don't talk trash about the company that you currently work for. You don't fight and that feeds you. You don't
Yeah.
you don't do that. And you also don't do that in a personal conversation either. So, I had to have that open conversation of what I really wanted out of it. This is a hobby. This is a cathartic thing for me.
Mhm.
Like, what I do is for catharsis, is for happiness, is for peace.
How did they take that answer?
Well, I'm working for them now, so
Pretty good then.
think there's a level of understanding. And the
Yeah.
fact that I'm not making 6 videos a day and I'm putting 100% of my job, it says something.
It is totally fair to be cautious about perception, because if, even within the company, if other people see that and they think that, you're spending your whole workday making YouTube videos and you've got the same title and all that stuff, I get that fear, but I think other industries have come a long way in understanding that people can do things outside of work, and that's okay. And when you hire somebody, you don't own them, and embracing other hobbies and even supporting people in entrepreneurial stuff. And there's some companies that do, like, they'll pay for a sabbatical and encourage you to, like, start something up if you have a desire to. And I want to see more of that. I think the last thing I want to talk about is, so we mentioned what success means, and you mentioned role models, and early on you were saying, the CEOs of these operators, those were the role models, and maybe that's changed. But in that, I hear there's a definition of success that you've got for yourself, and you're aware of it, and it changes over time and all that stuff. So, like, what advice would you give to people about, defining their version of whatever it means to be successful, but they also want to enjoy themselves along the way? Like, what advice would you give to somebody that wants both?
And that was a post that I put on my LinkedIn a few days ago.
Okay.
It was a question that I asked for leaders and just for people and for leaders that how can you maintain growth, but also being happy? So, how can you be successful and achieve that joy? I would tell that person, and this is what I would tell myself, does it align with your values? Does it align with what you really care about, which you know are your non negotiables? And then the second one is, do those values that you have, do they make you happy? Because if you're happy, you'd be a lot more productive. You'd actually want to do the things that you want to do. I've had this realization moment where I was asking myself, and I see this where there are trade offs as you move higher in the corporate ladder. You spend less time with your family. You spend less time doing other things that you used to do to invest your time into this bigger responsibility. And I want to ask that question that is it worth it?
Mm.
And no one's really answered that question. But I think it's because a lot of people have that question themselves. Then I had a crucial conversation with someone yesterday in terms of what the trade-offs are and how it is a constant questioning or an iteration of, does it make you happy? Is this somewhere that you want to go? I would tell that person that if it aligns with their values and honestly, does it make you happy? And a lot of people like to downplay happiness, or a lot of people like to focus on external things to make them happy. No, happiness comes, and this sounds really cheesy and philosophical, but happiness actually does come from within.
Yeah.
Like if you're content, if you feel fulfilled right now, then you're not transferring a power or transferring your feelings or letting other people control how you go about your day.
You're not giving up control of your own happiness, and you're
Yes.
taking ownership of it. And like what you said about, does this make me happy? Does it align with my values? Well, for one, you have to know what your values are, have a thought about that. But I think about, that's a skill of having a crucial conversation with yourself and saying, what do I actually care about? What do I actually want out of my work, out of my life, out of all this stuff? And I think that introspection has played a huge part in my life. I can tell it has in yours too.
Thank you. It
Yeah.
it really has, and as I mentioned to you, as you progress in your career, you start asking those questions, you start having those interactions. Basically, you run into a lot of BS and you ask, "Do you wanna take it?"
Yep, for sure. The other one for me was having a role models and then working with them for longer, getting to know them more and be like, "Oh, I don't actually want all of what they have." Like, maybe there's parts of it that are good, but yeah, there's some other parts that are not, and that makes you question what you want or what you thought you wanted. Well, this has been awesome. I had fun. I hope you did too. What are the best ways for people to learn more? YouTube channel, how can they reach out to you? All that stuff.
Everyone can reach out to my LinkedIn, I have my email address on there, what's preferred as far as contact information goes. You can also check out my YouTube channel, Yoshi Pradhan, and that's where Petro Paper podcast publications are on there. You can also check on Apple Podcasts for Petro Papers and reach out to me there as well.
Awesome. We'll grab all the links and put them in, the YouTube video description and in the show notes on pod2.co/podcast, which is where we put all the show notes and transcription and all that stuff. Again, thank you. This was fun. Appreciate you coming on. And this has been another episode of Achieve and Enjoy. Subscribe to us on YouTube, follow on, LinkedIn, Twitter, pod2.co, all the places where podcasts are podcasted. Hope you enjoy your work this week.